So, welcome to what is this, lecture 6 now? We're moving into the Napoleonic era, which means we're concluding the French Revolution, but not necessarily the age of revolution, the era of revolution. So, there's a lot still going on, and we're still sort of in the shadow of the French Revolution at this time. And a lot of people, historians might see Napoleon and people who lived at the time too as a revolutionary figure himself, even though he comes to be kind of an emperor, similar to emperors in some ways in history, but new in some important ways as well. Uh, and we also see the resurgence of more modern forms of conservatism as as well. Okay, so let's talk about this era a little bit and Napoleon specifically. I like this quote from your textbook that says, "Those who witnessed Napoleon Bonaparte's stunning rise to European dominance might have cast him as either Frankenstein or his monster." What is up with that? So you're also reading this week, and I've posted it for a while now, to start reading Mary Frankenstein's Mary Shelley's work Frankenstein. It's sometimes considered one of the founding expressions of Romanticism. But I'm not going to talk too much about that now and the frightening parts of that novel and themes in that novel, other than to say that we read it because this was a time of rapid change and a lot of anxiety over the older order of things kind of breaking down as kings and monarchies were being challenged. At the same time, we have the rise of science and all that that meant as well. The idea that knowledge and our knowledge can be expanded almost exponentially through the scientific method, and as we gain more knowledge, we can gain more control over our environment and what we can create. Well, Napoleon created quite an empire eventually, but keep in mind he comes out of the French Revolution. Um, and he himself had supported the revolution. He'd been in the army during the revolution. He rose up through the ranks of the officer corps as well in the revolution. Well, initially an enlisted man, but he becomes a military hero of sorts during the revolution. And along with his brother, they conduct a coup d'etat, a taking over of the government largely by force. And this ended the Directory government. I remember in France, the last stage of the French Revolution consisted of a government and a constitution called the Directory, with 5 people who served as the president kind of simultaneously. That's why they called it the Directory. Had a National Assembly and a Senate. The Directory did, but it didn't really make anybody in France very happy. It was kind of a cumbersome sort of government you could imagine, with 5 different sort of heads of state. Who is the head of state, right? Conservatives weren't happy with it. The more socially conscious and working class people, the old Jacobins, they weren't very happy with it because it had extremely limited voting rights. And then walk onto the scene Napoleon Bonaparte in 1799. He puts the question, once he comes to power, he puts the question of adopting a new constitution in France up to the people in what will be called a plebiscite. It's a word you should be familiar with. There's a number of political campaigns of this type that were basically plebiscites. A plebiscite is PLEBISCITE, plebiscite. It's like a referendum. It's like a yes or a no. The word itself comes to us from the Latin and the Greek, and it means a pleb. A pleb is a lower class person or the people, and a side like plebiscite is to put to to the people yes or no. They can kill it or they can't, or they won't. So choose yes or no to adopt the Constitution. His Constitution is elected. Shortly after that, by 1802, Napoleon has pronounced himself a council for life. And very quickly he begins to consolidate his power even more through this new form of nationalism. It wasn't altogether new, but it was kind of mobilizing symbols of Napoleon everywhere, on coins, on engravings, on new history books that were made, in paintings, in public monuments. So all of that promotes the idea of Napoleon Bonaparte, as this great leader, the man on horseback, as he was known. You can look up pictures of him with the famous ones of him with the vest in his hand, thrust in his pocket. You can talk about his creation. You can think about his creation of these new honors, national honors like the Legion of Honor. You could actually get a lifelong pension if you won the Legion of Honor award. Pretty nice. He also tries to create, though, what is called a meritocracy. That's like merit, MERIT, OCRACY. Rule by those who have achieved merit, by those who have accomplished things, like winning awards, right? The best and the brightest. Napoleon, what I'm trying to say is Napoleon said that he wasn't going to be a monarch, a king like old kings. He, in fact, embodied the values of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, in one way that he did this, I guess, was that he created equality before the law, at least for men. If you look there in your textbook, it was very different for women living under the new, as it was called, Napoleonic Code. He also guaranteed property rights. Right, this is really popular for the middle class. Seizure of property by the government couldn't just be done willy-nilly. There had to be reasonable cause, right? He also guarantees religious freedom, religious liberty, and establishes a uniform code of law, before which everyone will be judged equally, right? Before the Revolution, of course, before the Constitution in France was passed, before even the American Constitution was passed, before the kind of social contract that those constitutions provided, people had different rights depending on what status they were. Now the only big difference within France were gender differences, that Napoleon actually limits women's ability to inherit their husbands' businesses if they were widowed, if they were living independently after the death of their husband. It would be more difficult for them to carry on business. Women had no rights during divorce. Men could divorce for basically any reasons. So those are all things that were happening under the Napoleonic Code. But he's also, as you gather from your reading, probably what he's even more famous for than the Napoleonic Code was the string of military victories that he has between about 1807 and 1812, at which point things begin to go a little bit south, as they say. Napoleon creates this grand army, as it's called, La Grande Armée in French, string of victories, as I said. These one of the reasons why Napoleon was so successful as well is because the alliances that were arrayed against him were always shifting and changing. Europe had a history of being, since the fall of the Roman Empire, over 1,000 years earlier, had a history of being a continent of independent states, independent feudal states. Napoleon is ending the feudalism, and he's trying to end as well the tradition of these independent states by dominating them all. And the alliances were hard to keep together. There's like 5 or 6 different alliances that form against Napoleon. Napoleon is never as triumphant on the high seas as he is with his continental armies. So he's defeated quite soundly. The French Navy is very badly damaged at the Battle of Trafalgar, for example. He also dispatches a fleet to the colony of Saint Domingue, where there, as you know, was a revolution going on, to gain control over the situation there. Because of the mosquito and because of the vehement resistance of the people of Haiti, Napoleon's army is turned back and has to evacuate. That kind of sours Napoleon on the whole idea of empire in the Western Hemisphere. He thought it was too bothersome. He was always quite Eurocentric, meaning central power stemmed from Europe, he thought, and he was going to get rid of the some of these most troublesome and expensive colonies in North America. He sells the Louisiana Territory quite famously to Thomas Jefferson, the Louisiana Purchase, as we know it in this part of the world. Napoleon's great downfall is going to be, of course, the first one anyway, is his defeat, the Grand Army's defeat, 1 million men in this army, composing of people from many European ethnicities, and they're defeated in Russia in that campaign in 1812. Only a small fraction of the original army comes back to France the following year after that atrocious winter. And Napoleon is then defeated in 1814, only to be exiled and come back from exile in secret, sort of escaping from his island getaway in Elba and Saint Helena, the island. And he comes back and is defeated again soundly in 1815 at Waterloo. Then, to end out this period, we have the Congress of Vienna. This is one of these international conferences where they try to draw back the map of Europe in such a way that will preserve a balance of power. The goal at the Congress of Vienna was to keep Europe from being dominated from France altogether again. So what they did was they took away from France's territory a little bit, and they created these little buffer states, such as Belgium and others, and they minimized the numbers of states in the German-speaking areas as well. But there's still a lot of small principalities in what we call Germany. Today, Germany is still not unified. The main goal was, though, to create a balance of power, to strengthen smaller states and weaken big states like France. Okay, the last thing I want to mention in this chapter is Romanticism, because this period, especially after the French Revolution, is the time when we see the emergence of this new kind of thinking. It manifests itself in poetry and in artwork. It had some had some other impacts as well, beyond just the artistic. It impacted politics in some way, though there wasn't a particular romantic political party. It did impact politics. I think in particular this idea, especially in the early opposition to industrialism and the Industrial Revolution, which we'll be talking about in the next module, that people wanted to go back to the time in many ways before the Industrial Revolution, before the French Revolution. They felt at that time that the old certainties of life were being swept away. And it's from that angst, that worry, that I think Mary Shelley taps into as well in the novel Frankenstein. But I'll talk about that more in another short video. You can see the opposition, though, to capitalism in what is called the Peterloo riots, sometimes called by people the Peterloo massacres because of the unarmed people that were maimed and killed there. So look at that. Be aware of the Peterloo riots. Be aware of some of those study questions in your textbook, such as in what ways did Napoleon continue the French Revolution, and in what ways did he break from it? Why was Napoleon able to gain control over so much of Europe's territory? Look at that. And why did independence movements, why were they thwarted, unsuccessful, in places like Italy and Poland in this era, but not in Greece, not in Belgium, and not in Latin America? Greece particularly became a place where a lot of romantics wanted to go and fight for Greek independence from the Ottoman Empire, for example. And then there's the example of Simon Bolivar in Latin America. This isn't a Latin American history, of course, but we should be aware that the revolutions in America and France did occur in other places as well, including, as we talked about, Haiti, but also in Simon Bolivar's revolutions across Latin America. So with that, I'll leave you today. Happy reading, and don't forget to participate in this module's discussion forum. Right? Talk to you soon.